tools and education. We'll start by focusing on the tools and education first, of course. So in terms of those tools they're currently using and they want access to, if we put aside like the accounting software, which is just needed to run their business, they're really looking for like systems to expand their customer base. So what was on the top of that list in the survey was website and website management tools, tools for marketing assistance and lead generation, and also small business contact management systems. Those are the three that are the most desired. And that makes sense because those are the ones that are going to help them grow their businesses. And those who have employees, they're like slightly larger. They're also interested in systems that are going to make them more desirable to employees. And I know I'm going to talk about that a little bit later, but they're looking for that to like attract and retain. So a couple other areas, if we look at the types of tools or assistance that members ranked as would most allow their business to grow, we see that training on social media and training on e-commerce and tech tools, that really topped the list. And again, these were those tools that allowed them greater access to potential customers and clients, more efficiently allow them to accept and make payments. They're looking for fintech that makes it easier for them to gain access to capital, as well as technology that helps them find and connect and onboard new hires. And so this tech training is of particular interest in those micro businesses. And then, of course, the help with the hiring is of more interest to the larger companies. And so this interest in fintech that makes it easier to gain access to capital, brings us back to just that, right? When we asked NAWBO members what would be of greatest help to help their business grow right now, it was access to capital, whether that was from SBA loans or private capital or other financing. That's what seemed to top the list. To be honest, they need access to credit to help grow their business. And interestingly, certifying your company as a woman-owned business allows you access to a greater number of grants and loans. But we only saw about 1 in 3 NAWBO members had actually reported having that certification. And so that was a little surprising, right? Because that's a great way to gain access to more finance. And yet, that just hadn't happened yet for about 2/3 of the membership. And then beyond that, when you need financing, unless you're financially stable, you're not going to get approved for those loans that you're saying that you need. And so although most of these NAWBO companies have been in business for many years, fewer than 1/3 also said that they had a business credit rating. So that was surprising as well. And we saw that it's probably about 1 in 10, like fewer than 10% even used an SBA loan last year. And in the lifetime of their business, about 1/4 of them have used private business loans. Most are tapping into their personal savings. And, those who say they used their personal savings in the last year in particular, that was actually up this year. So they're tapping into that even more, particularly among those smallest of companies, the ones that don't have any employees. They are especially likely to be tapping into that personal savings. And in fact, where it is among those companies with no employees, it's like 75% that have said they've used their personal savings at some point to fund their business. So, it's hard, right? You have to prove that you're financially stable, and in order to get those loans and to get that capital that you need. And part of that showing that you're financially stable is actually running a payroll. And a majority of NAWBO members have employees, which is great. They're running that payroll, they can show that, but 4 in 10 don't. And so, and of those that don't have employees, 1/3 of them aren't paying themselves either. So it really becomes, a challenge to prove that you're a stable, viable company when you're trying to apply for these loans. If you don't have proof, show that you're actually paying yourself. And so, when we ask those NAWBO members who don't pay themselves, what's the issue? What would cause you to begin to be able to do that? It was growth, right? They needed to grow. They needed to reach a particular revenue level or a particular profit level to where they would feel comfortable. And, kind of going full circle, they need technology and capital to make that growth happen. And so, long story short, that's what we're going back to, that technology, that education, and that capital. So.
Makes perfect sense, Trish. And you mentioned just a moment ago, one of the areas that we hear about and we talk about a lot among our WBO circles is the struggle to hire and the need for a diverse workforce. What exciting findings came out of this survey relating to the workforce?
There are definitely some here. So, as NAWBO members, they have companies that are well established. On average, they've been in business like 14 years, well over 10 years. But most of, about 4 out of 5 of them are micro businesses with fewer than 10 employees. And then really just 1 in 10 have more than 25 employees. So we're really talking about, this micro level, and 4 in 10 don't have any. And that proportion that doesn't have any employees is actually up slightly from last year. So we've got, a greater proportion of women-owned businesses that are sole proprietorships. Maybe they're, just starting out and it's just them. So most NAWBO members, which is a trend with other small businesses as well, they're using contractors. And when they're using these contractors, they're not using them just here and there or seasonally. They're really using them year round to help them, and we've seen that in other studies, that small businesses who use contractors, they'd rather use the contractors rather than hire on, full employees, due to the cost of the finding them, due to the cost of retaining them. They're hesitant to take on an expense that could be considered more, long term, in case their business wanes. Like, they don't want to take on that risk. And when it comes to recent hiring, really fewer than a third of the NAWBO members said that they had posted any job openings in the month prior to the survey. And that was down slightly from last year. But when we look at those NAWBO members who already have employees, not the small proprietors that are just them, really almost half of them had posted. So we do see that the looking is happening, right? If you've already got employees, half of you have posted something in the last month. And we know we're in a tight labor market, right? So it's challenging. It's really challenging to find that talent that's needed. And NAWBO members continue to struggle to hire. A majority said it was harder for them to hire than it was a year ago. And it's softened a little bit compared to the year before, where we had about 2/3 saying it was harder than that year, but it's still difficult, right? It's still a majority of them saying it's been harder. And so finding the right talent and skills, as well as a lack of applicants, are really the main reasons why NAWBO members are saying it's more difficult to hire. And we see that, we see that in other studies. But what was really interesting this year in the NAWBO data, to me anyway, is that losing potential hires to competitors has really become a significant reason this year. About 4 in 10 mentioned that. And that was something that, when I was looking through last year's data, I didn't see that. So that's something where it's not that we're not finding who we want, but we're losing it to the competition. So when they even, they're getting these applications that they're applicants they're interested in, but they're just not able to offer perhaps what the larger companies are offering, or even what other competitors are offering. And it's not just salaries. Like, we know that it's also benefits, right? It's other things like, so those companies with employees, this goes back to them being more interested in systems that make them more desirable to employees, whether it's, retirement systems, employee recognition, engagement things, an EAP. And that also, when I've looked at small businesses, the first benefit that usually comes up, it usually means offering a health plan, and that health plan, they will offer that typically before retirement, before any of the other, pet insurance, any of those things. So, of those NAWBO members who currently have employees, about 2/3 of them are offering that health plan. They're typically offering full coverage, which is great. But those who don't, they're really citing cost as the number one reason for not offering one. And, when we asked everyone, not just those who aren't offering benefits, but we asked everyone, how much money do you have on average that you can pay per employee to fund those benefits for them? And it was really about $300 a month. That's what they had that they could set aside for that. And so to me, this really reinforces that need for access to capital to help these businesses. It'll help them grow their access to technology, which will expand their customer base, but it'll ultimately help them hire more because they'll have a steady demand. They'll have the need for actual employees, not just contractors, and then the ability to make competitive offers to their, potential employees. And that'll hopefully help them keep them, right? Retain them, and they're not going to be lost to some other competitor because they'll be able to offer all the things that any competitor could offer those employees.
And of course, we want to retain our employees once we have them, close to us because the cost of finding new ones is so substantial. The other area in benefits that I was curious about is it seemed as though our survey said 1 in 4 women business owners offer paid family leave. I wonder if you could describe the types of companies that are offering those sorts of benefits. In addition, we know there are bipartisan discussions on Capitol Hill in both the House and the Senate as relates to paid leave, including a House working group focused solely on paid leave solutions at the federal level. What did ADP find women business owners could agree on as we move forward with a potential paid leave policy on a national level?
Sure. Well, it's probably not surprising that larger businesses are more likely to offer paid family leave than are the smaller ones. And by that, I mean that paid family leave is basically not offered and didn't seem very relevant among the sole proprietors without employees. They just, take off when they need off or whatever. But also, at times we see professional services companies being more likely to offer. And it could be that they know that there's an expectation that they're going to be offering that in order to have employees. And this is a pattern I kind of see among both NAWBO members and among other small businesses. So if we look at NAWBO members with the micro companies, and those are fewer than 10 employees, you were right. We do see about 4 in 10 offering paid family leave, but a majority of the companies with 10 or more employees will offer that. So that incidence definitely increases as a company grows. And part of that may just be an ability for the company to afford to offer the benefit. But I think another factor is the need, they need to because they're competing for that talent. And paid family leave is something that some employees are going to expect. And there's also the ability of a larger company to be able to continue everyday operations when an employee is out on leave. They're better equipped to distribute that workload or hire temporary help. Honestly, when I was reading some of the comments from some of the NAWBO members regarding that question, some of the smaller ones were, they didn't offer paid family leave because they were like, how am I going to run my business if my only one other employee or two is not there? It was sort of, that came up more than once in the comments. And so I think it's not that there's not a desire to offer it. It's, how do I keep things running if I do? Because when we asked companies, who don't offer it, why they don't. Those top answers were cost and also the makeup of their workforce, either part-time or contractors. Which brings us to that, federal policy, right? With that being said, there is general support among the NAWBO membership for a federal paid leave policy that's inclusive of the self-employed, and small businesses. I mean, it was 9 out of 10 that would support policy if it were created. And to me, that's just a super impressive level of agreement on something. And when we asked them which type of program they believe would be most beneficial for their business, half of NAWBO members would be in favor of a policy, but only if it were an opt-in that would allow self-employed and businesses to choose their participation level. We had another third that would support a tax credit incentive program similar to the employee retention credit that was enacted during COVID. But those were the two types of plans, definitely with the most support.
Terrific. Thank you. Another piece of the survey that was interesting seemed to me that most of our women business owners say broadband access is no longer a top issue for them. Do you think this is still the case, or has a post-COVID world decreased the need for higher network speeds and potentially impacted how our women utilize broadband?
Well, certainly the need for like higher network speeds is not going to go away. Like the amount of data that's being shared and exchanged, it's really just too great to be handled, by any other means. And so what was really interesting is I was, looking at some of this data and looking at some of the other trends, that, even in 2020, prior to COVID, the FCC was, reporting that broadband penetration rates were like 90% for like almost all but like a handful of states. And that the lowest penetration rates were probably down around 80. But what you saw was this really big difference between urban areas and rural areas. And so, what we've been seeing is, COVID really accelerated everyone's need and desire for broadband. And so it's not just for entertainment, of course, but for business and for work. And so Congress allocated the special emergency funds to the FCC to provide, greater access for low-income households. But they've also worked to expand broadband.
Yeah, so people can certainly share their link.
Oh, they're answering too. They also work to expand that broadband access in rural areas. But I think this affordable, which is the way we ask the question, right? That's really key because we didn't have a measure necessarily for urban and rural in our study, but 92% said they had access to reliable, affordable broadband, which leaves us with still about 1 in 10 who couldn't say that, right? And so if I would have to say who that 10% might be, my best guess would probably be those are business owners in rural locations. And really, it's definitely still an issue because increased access to high-speed broadband is really going to help those rural businesses expand their potential, customer base. It's going to give them increased sales and revenue. It's going to help them expand their access to talent, if that talent if they can be done with remote work, right? So that'll help them find possibly more affordable, qualified talent in a larger pool. And it'll also just allow them greater access to online tools, which may, increase their own efficiency or even their ability to, focus on the true offering of their business and not just running their business. So those are all ways where it would be great to have, universal access so that all these businesses are on the same footing.
Absolutely. Trish, thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule to join the NAWBO community today. Are there any last minute thoughts you'd like to share with our membership?
For sure. There's definitely like one really interesting, I saw lots of interesting things in the data, but the one that I'd really like to share is really that, I mentioned earlier that small business owners are really busy. They want solutions for their businesses that are, easy and provide features that they need, and they want to be kept in compliance, with all the regulations. And, what I noticed in the data is that NAWBO members are definitely leveraging outside experts and solutions to help them run their business and make sure that they're compliant and running things the right way. I've already mentioned that most of them are using contractors. So when their workload gets too great, they've figured out an economical way to save themselves time. But I also noticed a couple of other things that when we asked NAWBO members who they turn to for advice and guidance on their business decisions, 3 out of 4 are turning to a professional service provider like a CPA, a lawyer, a financial advisor. And that's actually slightly higher than what we see among, some of our other small business studies. So, they're learning to, or they have learned that there are other experts out there that can help them, right? That they don't have to do it all alone. They're also much more likely than other small business market to turn to professional or industry organizations like NAWBO. 2/3 of them will turn to that type of organization for advice, and that is typically much, much lower. So clearly NAWBO is a trusted source for its members, which, is always a great thing to hear. And of course, the other advisors they think of, they mention business colleagues and friends, and that's really common. We see that all the time. But what we usually don't see, and we saw it here among the NAWBO membership, is that 1/3 of them actually turn to their solution providers for advice. And that's, those who provide their accounting or their payroll or their HR. They're actually turning there. And it makes sense, right? Because they want to be sure their business is being run correctly. They don't want to focus on areas that they're not experts in. They want to focus on their business. So they turn externally for this expertise on functions, such as payroll. A majority of those NAWBO members with employees, they're using a third-party firm or they're using their accountants for payroll. And if you have 10 or more employees, that jumps up to like 70% using that. And this is a much higher incidence than what we see in the overall small business market. So they have clearly, using that third party, they have realized that's a way to access expertise and free up their time. And it seems like they have seen that, they've realized this is a benefit to their business. And this is also where they can gain access to outside technology to lighten the load on themselves. So in some cases, these third parties may be offering them the tech tools they need to attract and retain employees. They might be able to offer them, access to their pay information, or maybe a portal for HR, or even help, gaining and figuring out their health or retirement information. So this kind of brings us full circle back to those NAWBO members really needing access to, education. And by that, we mean that information and training on solutions that help them expand their client base, right? They need access to technology and capital. And really leveraging outside expertise and solutions is one of the ways that they have found to gain access to each of those things to help them grow their business. So those NAWBO businesses are strong.
Thank you, Trish. And if you'll indulge us and give us just a few more minutes, we've got some questions and comments in our chat area that I thought I would touch on with you. I love this comment Vivian shared with us, that there's a difference from having access to broadband and having reliable, consistent connections.
Sure.
And I think we're hearing, Pat mentioned this. I think Pat's in Cleveland. You might have dropped calls if you're using broadband for your calling system, and the notion that, there's a level of professionalism we want with consistency with broadband. Any reflections on that, Trish?
For sure. And I think that's all part of the increase in the infrastructure too, because we probably realize that in some areas, it doesn't necessarily have to be rural. I know personally, I sit, south of Houston, but in our neighborhood, it is well known that our service is not the best. And but we do see them making these improvements. And I think that is the ultimate goal, is to get everyone, reliable access to broadband. But it's definitely going to take some time as I see them, digging every day to try to put these lines in.
Yep, absolutely. And we had another couple of comments, and I know this is true of my state of New York, that paid family leave sometimes is a state mandate already.
Yep.
New Mexico, I think Lori Guthrie, our good friend from New Mexico, commented on New Mexico's law. So I think that some of us, and depending on the state law, face that as a mandate. Perhaps some states have the opt-in, as you said, our members talked about. Please share your thoughts.
Yeah, we did see that too in the data. We did see some people who, there was that small percent that didn't agree with a federal mandate, and some of the responses were like, we already have this on the state level. We don't need it to be higher than that. And so, yeah, they're definitely a little, I think people like the idea of it, but maybe there's a little less agreement on what level it should be coming in at.
Mm-hmm. Sure. I'm wondering, with respect to access to capital, and as you were describing credit worthiness, were there any insights that you were able to glean for those companies that wish to work with contractors, independent contractors versus W-2 employees? Anything that you could share with our folks, some of whom much prefer to work with contractors than W?
Yeah, and some of that's from this study, and some of it's from studies I've done with with other small business studies. Is it's really it is that long-term commitment. If you have a W-2 employee, you're kind of feeling much more like I need to be thinking much more long-term with that person. Whereas with the contractor, you might not feel that same obligation if it's like, well, I'm going to set this up for a couple of months and, see how that works out. And if it's, if I still need them, I'm going to keep going. And I think we see that because when we ask the question about, do you work with people seasonally? Do you work with them year round? Like, how do you do this? It was really, it seemed like it was more year round for sure. Like, and some of them were both. They had some seasonal and some year round, but it really was it was the economy of having the contractor versus the full time.
Great. Well, thank you again. Pardon me, Trish, thank you so much for all of the work that you have done, that ADP, our trusted collaborator and partner, has done for us and with us. We certainly hope that we will see you along with the team. I happen to be in Austin doing some final preparations for our WBC in October 15th to 17th. Right now, we hope we see you here in Austin for the Women's Business Conference, and would love now to turn the program over to El Patu.
It was a pleasure. Thank you guys. Have a great meeting. See you soon.
Thank you so much, Trish, again, for your partnership. We really appreciate all y'all's hard work, and it was great to see you, and hopefully we'll see you in person, not on a virtual screen sometime soon.
Great. Thanks so much. Okay.
Hi, ladies. It's great to see all of your lovely faces. Now we're going to get into the nitty-gritty of today's advocacy agenda for 2023. I'm going to move over one slide. As you've seen before, the top 4 things we're going to be looking at this year are addressing the needs of the micro business owner, encouraging emerging entrepreneurs, workforce, accessing capital through increased financial literacy, education, and digital tools, and caring for the business owner and caretaker flexibilities for the employee. I wanted to first exit out of this PowerPoint and I wanted to make sure that everyone knew where to find the, and of course I'm having, not being able to show, I want to share where on our website you would be able to find these tools, because the toolkit, I apologize, guys. My computer is not being friendly to me today. If you go to NAWBO.org and you go under advocacy, you will find the NAWBO Advocacy 2023 Toolkit. let me know in the chat box if you're having issues finding it. You have to be logged in as a member to access the toolkit. Now, not everyone has access to the advocacy toolkit, but if you're a member, you have access. I'm just double checking. Thank you, Connie, for putting the link into the chat box because my computer is not being friendly to me today. If you click on that link, you'll see we have a document that has the agenda, how to jumpstart your advocacy effort. So if this is your first year as a NAWBO advocacy chair, kind of gives you the lay of the land of how to start advocating on behalf of your chapter. There's a sample letter that you can send to your congressmen and senators. There's a sample press release for local news outlets, whether it's TV or newspaper. We've also got talking points for you to utilize. And I've also put the litmus test in there as well. As you know, in order to have NAWBO's backing on any form of legislation, we put legislation through a litmus test, which is a 4-prong test. It has to be bipartisan. It has to be coalition building. There has to be data to back it up. And there needs to be, the legislation needs to advance women in business. And it's very important that we say both women and business because it needs to be a women in business issue. So all of these documents are easily acceptable, you can easily get to them on the NAWBO advocacy website, but remember, you have to be logged in. Let me know if you're having any issues with accessing those documents. And now I will move on into the agenda. So we've talked about this and I kind of gave you guys an outline. The first part of the agenda is the addressing the needs of the micro business and encouraging emerging entrepreneurs. So here's the background data that we found. Through the most recent survey, 92% of women-owned businesses surveyed were micro businesses. While the businesses may be small, they're providing the lion's share of family income, with 63% of these businesses providing 50 to 100% of the household income. So not only are you a small business, you are mighty and you are helping your family and to provide for your entire household. By giving these businesses the resources, by telling Congress, hey, look at the makeup of these businesses, look at what they're providing, look how they are. Thank you, Jeannie, for letting me know that you're able to access. By giving them the opportunity to increase wealth, it will increase our most underserved areas. So one of the ways that we're going to accomplish this is by defining a micro business. NAWBO believes that any business, when we codify a definition of micro business, we believe that it should be any business with 25 or fewer employees and less than $1 million in annual revenue should qualify as a micro business. Now, many of you may say, hey, 25 is very different than 5 to 10. NAWBO did not come to this number lightly. We looked at the fact that restaurants are going to have more than 5 employees. And we looked at the fact that other businesses are going to have a little more than that 5 to 10 range. So that's why we put the number as 25, because we were looking at different types of businesses and annual revenue. This definition, why we want to get this definition across the finish line is this definition would then be used by federal agencies to better support access to capital and contracting opportunities. So that kind of falls into the second bullet, fair and equitable access for micro businesses. What does this mean? So according to our most recent survey, only 18% of women-owned businesses have over $1 million in annual revenue. Why the revenue number, Sharon? The revenue number was something that we've been debating, and how we came to less than $1 million was, sorry, and I'm trying to follow the chat and talk at the same time. It's proving to be a little more difficult than I anticipated. Yes, it's been past research, and it looks like Jeannie and them came to a similar consensus in Indiana. I'm sorry, Ohio. Okay, so basically when we looked at how could this help? What we could do is we could create set aside specifically for these business owners. What this means is that SBA has like the 7A loan program, the 504 loan program. By creating a definition, then when Congress goes in to say, hey, this is how much money, or appropriators say this is how much money is going to go into these programs, then we can say, hey, there should be a carve out, there should be a set aside that goes to these small micro businesses. It's a very similar situation to what we did with the Paycheck Protection Program, when we started to basically say, hey, women aren't getting into the PPP, so we need to set aside dollars for women and different diverse businesses. It's the same thing here. We're saying it can't just go to these larger companies. Larger companies can't be the only people accessing these loan dollars. We need to make sure that micro businesses can get access to these loan dollars. And by setting aside a set amount of money for these businesses, it will make it easier for them to access. Same goes with procurement. We also believe that Congress should look at and really look at researching more into and studying the needs of the micro business and how it's important to better understand federal contracting and procurement solutions for these entrepreneurs. And once Congress can kind of study this and look at this, they can realize what we've realized and how important it would be to have a set aside for these micro businesses to enter the contracting space. So basically, with advances in technology, we know that micro businesses can fully function and have the capacity to execute federal contracts, but we also want to make sure that they can enter their procurement marketplace. And we believe through a definition and through micro business set-asides, more of these businesses would be able to enter that an access point in procurement. And then also under this setting of fair and equitable access for micro business owners, we must make it accessible for technology and digital tools on the federal level. One of the things that you all expressed in the survey was that nearly 80% of women business owners currently have and are still interested in expanding their access to marketing assistance and lead generation through technology and social media. So what that tells us is that we need to go to Congress and ensure that any federal programs also include technology and digital tools that will help you expand your marketing assistance and lead generation. So that's another piece of the puzzle that we've been looking at. Now I'm going to, because I've been talking a lot, and I want to try to look into the chat to see if I can send some responses. My colleague Meredith, I'm going to bring down, pick up the next slide. Meredith's going to talk to you about the workforce section of the agenda.
Thanks, Elle. Hi, everybody. Good to be here today. So in the interest of time, I won't dive too deep on every aspect that's included in the advocacy agenda. And I think that Trish did a great job of highlighting some of the data points that relate to workforce issues writ large. But the main thrust of this aspect of the advocacy agenda is how do our women business owners who are looking to build and retain a robust, diverse, well-skilled workforce, what's going to allow business owners to stay competitive in the marketplace, and what can the federal government do to help provide those supports? So within the workforce policy agenda, we've identified 3 main areas of focus in terms of advocacy. The first being the unique needs of women business owners as it relates to a contract workforce. Trish outlined over 70% of respondents in the most recent NAWBO survey are utilizing anywhere from 1 to 11 or more contractors, with over 60% of those respondents using those workers or those contract workers year round. So, the NAWBO policy ask to Congress would be, are there ways to ensure that small business owners can continue to utilize independent contractors, utilize that 1099 status as a critical component of the workforce? The second item underneath workforce for this year's advocacy agenda would be continuing to help level the playing field for small business owners so they can remain competitive. Trish outlined some of that data, but it's really asking Congress to consider legislation, policy fixes that could help small business owners continue to remain competitive access federal and state benefits that make a difference when it comes to remaining competitive against larger employers. And then finally, as Trish and Lisa touched on, a bipartisan solution to federal paid leave policies is a third component under workforce this year. As Trish outlined, there continues to be large support coming out of the NAWBO survey for a paid leave solution, provided that it is something that small business owners can afford to do and that works with the unique needs of smaller employers and the self-employed. And so the ask on the Hill this year is, can Congress continue to work toward a bipartisan solution that gives business owners the option to access paid leave systems that are going to work financially for the small business workforce? So again, that's just a quick overview of the workforce component of the advocacy agenda this year. And I'll turn it over to, I believe, my colleague Bailey, who's going to outline accessing capital through increased financial literacy, education, and digital tools, which is the third aspect of the advocacy agenda this year.
Great, and thank you, Meredith, and good afternoon, everybody. I'm sorry that I am not on camera and not able to see everybody this afternoon. Unfortunately, we had some technical difficulties, so I had to dial in. But I did want to let everybody know that I put makeup on for this, and I was fully planning to be on camera and to see all of your lovely faces, but
You know what I don't.
unfortunately, I had to dial in. I think I'm getting some feedback from somebody. Okay, so the next piece of the policy agenda that we wanted to walk through this afternoon is the access to capital and financial literacy. And I think, just as we say every year, we can't really have a policy agenda without addressing access to capital. And I also think that Trish and Lisa touched on this earlier, that there are still a lot of gaps within the capital space for women-owned businesses. And, you know, through the survey, we learned that a lot of women business owners are, you know, still relying on their personal savings and loans from friends and family in order to finance their businesses. And so I think that is one part of the issue that we're looking at, which is the access issue. And the other piece is financial literacy. And, you know, I think it's one thing for there to be capital resources available, but it's something else entirely to be able to understand what's available and how it plays into your business. Because I know sometimes, you know, these applications for funding can be burdensome and overwhelming. And sometimes they ask for a lot of personal information, and it's not always clear, you know, why you need to share certain information about yourself and your business to qualify for different capital resources. And so I think that's why we've really prioritized access to capital alongside financial literacy and digital tools. So we're really trying to urge lawmakers to investigate different methods of educating businesses that are both relevant and accessible for women and minority-owned businesses. And this includes some guidance on how to build relationships with financial institutions. And I think this is a really important piece of the policy agenda, because I think, as we all saw during the pandemic, there were a lot of small businesses that missed out on capital and relief opportunities simply because they lacked those relationships with their banks and financial institutions. And so, you know, with that said, we just want to ensure that businesses are, you know, prepared for the future if, unfortunately, we run into another situation like a pandemic or some other emergency, that business owners understand that it's very, very important to develop those relationships with banks and financial institutions. So that's one piece of it. And then another thing that we've been thinking about is that we would like to see some of the entrepreneurial development programs that are offered through the Small Business Administration. So we can think about the Women's Business Centers, the Small Business Development Centers, and SCORE, and other SBA resource partners to host events to help connect women business owners to financial institutions. And I think we'd also really like to see the financial institutions focus on educating women business owners on what's available as it relates to software programs for payroll, because another thing that we learned is that I think nearly half of women business owners who responded to the ADP survey still said that they are using, spreadsheets and processing payroll by hand, which when there are so many different programs out there for processing payroll, there's not really, I think, a reason to be doing it by hand when there are just more efficient ways to do that process. And another piece that kind of plays into the software is that there are a lot of non-traditional sources of funding, whether that be through online lending or fintech. And we would really hope that some of the SBA resource partners can, provide resources and education on what kind of online lending or fintech is available, what to look out for in terms of fraud and other things that might come up as it relates to concerns with online lending and fintech. And really, I just think it's critical that women business owners have the confidence and power to seek out some of the capital opportunities that are available to fund and scale your businesses. And I think that is all that I have, and I believe I am passing it back over to Meredith to talk about the final component of the advocacy agenda, which is caring for the business owner and caretaking flexibilities for the employee.
Thank you, Bailey. So the fourth and final component of the advocacy agenda this year is caring for the business owner and caretaking flexibilities. In the interest of time, and I know we have lots of questions coming in, so we want to be able to answer those questions. The three main components of this aspect of the advocacy agenda are, of course, creating affordable healthcare options. That continues to be an essential platform, policy platform this year. Wellness and sustainability, which also gets into workforce issues. There's a lot of overlap, obviously, with a lot of these, but making sure that as Congress thinks about policies for business owners, that this aspect is included. And then meaning telemedicine, everything from telemedicine, mental health priorities, and this overall sustainability of business owners when we think about regulatory and fiscal policy. And then finally, prioritizing our nation's caretakers. This dovetails to a certain degree with something like a federal paid leave policy, a bipartisan solution to paid leave, but it also expands beyond that to include general supports for both business owners who are caretakers in those roles and also their employees. And with that, I'll turn it back to Elle for wrap up and questions on the policy agenda.
As I'm on mute talking to the air. I'm going to change it to our gallery view so we can all see each other and take the last 5 minutes to take questions, take thoughts, understand before I start taking questions that this is the NAWBO National Advocacy Agenda. This is a place for you and your chapter to look at, see what relates to you regionally, because think about it, we've got to look at everyone all over the country. So we've got to look at issues that are happening in different pockets all over the country and decide on what is an overall strategy as a national organization. Keep in mind, this isn't the only thing that we're going to advocate on. These are just the pieces of the puzzle that we've put together that are an overarching selection for us to look at. You and your chapter can look at this advocacy agenda and decide, you know what, we're going to go full throttle into micro business. We're going to take a deeper dive. We're going to look at state issues for this. We're going to look at prime contract, subcontract, whatever you want to call it. I don't want you to feel like you're pigeonholed into this. Think of it more as this is your jumping off point. This is your point where NAWBO National, this is where we're looking at, and what we've found that across the board, across the nation, from your National Advocacy Committee, where you have people all over in different regions of the country from different political parties discussing what they're hearing in their regions. This is what we came up with. But this is by no means the end all be all, nor is it, I don't want people to feel like, well, you didn't say this or you didn't say that. That doesn't mean you can't say it. That just means that this is our national agenda and this is where we're coming from on a national level. Is, thank you, Orletta. Okay, is there any, I'm trying to look for questions. Sorry, it's, can you subcontract to a resort that has the staff in place, but you're still the primary contractor, just, oh wait, I think you're responding to other people's stuff. Does anybody have, and y'all can raise your hand or you can just go off mute. We're back to our normal meeting.
So Al, this is Lori Guthrie. One of the challenges with working with the government, well, one of them, not all of them, is all of this new data security that's come down the pike. And, you know, I keep hoping that the SBA or somebody that, you know, would be a resource for us to help us either set up some sort of a secure database or access a government secure database. I'm not really sure. I'm just trying to figure out how I have a manual that, you know, I've got together. We're a micro business. So we have, you know, 4 employees and my husband and I. We don't have a lot of people. The only people that are on the computer are my husband and I and the production manager, but and we don't have any classified information. We're not working with that, but I just keep reading the FARs as far as the requirement for securing your data. And I'm a little worried that that's gonna come back and bite me.
So you need more resources and education around cybersecurity and what.
Yes, around what the federal government is expecting us to have in place as far as data security.
Okay. Thank
Mel,
you.
can I respond to that a little bit? I just wanted to perhaps encourage National to really leverage our partnerships with other organizations, because I'm currently in a cohort through NMSDC because I am a certified minority business. And with that, they're offering Cyber Ready Me currently. And so it's speaking to exactly what she was talking about, because I am preparing to be able to get more government contracts because we're going to get ourselves cyber ready, right? So perhaps we can look in leveraging our partnerships. If we're not able to do it, we might as well not recreate the wheel, but somehow offer that to our members.
Yes, and I know that I know in the past, and I couldn't tell you the exact date because I do send y'all a fair number of emails, but I know in the past that there has been some seminars that I've shared with you, but Lori, knowing that this is an issue for your business, I can now flag it for you, but
Okay.
also flag it for National to look into ways that we can ensure that y'all are receiving access to this type of education. But Kazuline, thank you so much for sharing that, because and for all the posts that y'all are putting in. We do better. I mean, we're about coalitions with NAWBO. So it is all about working together and working alongside. So also, just a flag for you, there was a survey in the Sunday, the NAWBO weekly roundup email, that was asking about different topics for education, with a new partnership. So if y'all could send your input into that survey, that would be great to hear, like, where you're coming from, where you need more education. Now I can look into more cybersecurity, but we can also work with partners as well. As Zuline said, you know, we don't need to reinvent the wheel, and I do believe that, and we can like look into other avenues. But I wanted to make sure that you all saw that survey, because we are asking what new education you need.
Well, and there was a comment earlier too about not having the capacity, maybe if you bid on a government contract, and then to be able to perform it with the number of employees. And I think that one thing that people can start looking at is subcontracting with the bigger companies, to be able to do a portion of it without having to complete the whole project. And in some ways, it's easier to do that because you're not dealing with the bureaucracy of the government. We do business with the FBI occasionally and haven't had a problem with that. But something to think about is to go out and look for the main contractors, because they have to meet the same quotas that the government does as far as 5%.
Yes,
Um,
and as Jeannie stated, regulations and requirements, that's, so it's not just education, it's also what the federal government is requiring. I do know that I want to be respectful of everybody's time, and I put 1 hour on the calendar. I want to say thank you for attending. Dawn, I see that you put something in the chat. If you want to shoot me an email, I'm going to put my email in the chat box because we're not going to be able to get to everybody's questions, but you guys can send me an email. And if you have any issues with the toolkit or questions, once you have time to digest and read everything, next month when we meet, the third Tuesday of the month at 12 p.m. Eastern, we can take, more questions, and we can kind of, after you've had time to read it and digest it a little bit more, feel free to send me questions in advance of the meeting if you have concerns, and we can discuss those as well. But I do want to, and someone said they want to explore Don's question. I haven't had a chance to read Don's question, but I'm going to read it. And we'll have time to discuss this more next month. I am copying Don's question right now. And we'll have a recording of this as well, so we'll be able to refer back. So just let me know what you all need in the meantime, and I'll chat with you soon. Thank you all for attending. We really appreciate it.